The dying man's breath came in shallow rasps, each one a battle against the Montana cold that had settled into his lungs over 62 years. Samuel Blackwood lay in the same bed where he'd slept since 1879, but now in March of 1951, the room felt smaller, the walls closer, as if the ranch itself was preparing to let him go. Coraline Blackwood sat beside him, her 72-year-old hands wrapped around his weathered fingers. She'd held these hands before, a lifetime ago, when they'd pulled her from the edge of death, when they'd saved her from a frozen depot platform in a future that would have ended before her 12th birthday. Grandma, her grandson Thomas, stood in the doorway, still wearing his army coat from the Korean War, still uncertain in this house he'd visited only twice in his 25 years. Why do you call him Dad when everyone knows he wasn't your real father? Cora didn't look away from Samuel's face. The gray eyes that had once been steel sharp now clouded with morphine and memory. She'd been waiting for this question, waiting 62 years to tell the whole truth. Because family isn't blood, Thomas. That's the first lesson your grandfather taught me. Let me tell you about the night I nearly died, and about the man who refused to let that happen. She took a breath, and the years fell away like snow from a shaken branch. December 24th, 1889. 9:47 at night. Coraline May Dalton counted the coins for the fourth time, spreading them across the frozen depot bench with fingers that had gone white at the tips. $1.14. The numbers didn't change no matter how many times she arranged them, didn't magically multiply into the $3.50 her Uncle Vernon had promised the ticket master. The thermometer nailed to the depot wall read 24 degrees below zero. The mercury had stopped, falling an hour ago, trapped at the bottom of the glass tube like her hope. She pulled her father's pocket watch from inside her mitten, the only warm thing left in the world. Waltham Gold Hunter, 1882 model. Worth $35 to someone who had buyers. Worth everything to a girl whose father's hands had wound it every morning for 7 years. The metal caught starlight just enough to show the engraving on the back. Letters she couldn't read, traced by fingertips 1,000 times until the grooves felt like home. For Samuel Blackwood, partner in all things, J.D., her father had meant to give this watch to someone named Samuel, someone who, according to Uncle Vernon, had died 3 years ago. Just another lie in a house built from them. The oil lamp above her head flickered twice, then surrendered to the dark. The depot master had left at 9:30, apologizing with words that meant nothing. Ain't no prepaid nothing, girl. Ain't no train tonight, neither. Temperature at 24 below. A human body loses heat 25% faster than at zero. Without fire, without shelter, without hope, survival time drops to 2, maybe 3 hours. Coraline knew none of these numbers. She only knew that her fingers had stopped hurting, which meant something worse than pain had begun. She tried to remember the morning, tried to hold on to the moment Uncle Vernon's hand had clamped around her wrist, his breath sour with last night's whiskey and this morning's rage. You think I feed you for free 6 months of your worthless mouth at my table. Time to earn your keep elsewhere. The paper he'd shoved into her coat pocket crinkled against her ribs now. She could read none of it, but she'd memorized his voice reciting the words. Prepaid ticket to St. Catherine's Orphanage. You owe me $340 for food, medicine, schooling. This squares us. The cold made liars of them all. The ticketmaster's records showed no payment. The last train had departed at 7:15, and Uncle Vernon had known both these facts when he'd left her on this bench at 7:30, with instructions to wait right here for the attendant. Hoofbeats. Real ones, not the phantom sounds her freezing brain had conjured twice already. Real hoofbeats, crunching through snow, getting closer, accompanied by the heavy breathing of a large animal pushing through drifts. Coraline tried to call out. Her jaw wouldn't work right, muscles locked tight against the cold that had invaded every cell. She managed a sound that might have been help or might have been nothing at all. The kind of noise that dies 10 feet from your mouth in air this frozen. The horse was massive, an Appaloosa with a coat like spilled paint, breath steaming white in plumes that looked like dragon smoke. The man who dismounted moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd done this in killing weather 100 times before. He wore a buckskin duster that hung to his knees, a Stetson boss of the plains pulled low, and gloves lined with sheepskin. He was tall, 6'2", and carried himself like a man who'd earned every inch of his height through hard work rather than genetics. "Anyone here?" His voice carried over the wind. Rough but not unkind. The voice of a man who expected the world to be harsh and met it with equal strength. Coraline's sound came again, barely more than the creak of frozen wood. The man's boots crunched closer. He knelt at bench level, bringing his face where she could see it without moving. Weathered skin that spoke of 60 winters. Gray hair thick under the hat brim. Gray eyes that missed nothing. Least of all a child dying alone on Christmas Eve. Those eyes went to her hands, still clutching the coins. Then to the watch. He froze. "That's Joshua Dalton's watch." Not a question. A statement delivered with the certainty of a man who'd seen that watch wind 1,000 times. His voice changed when he spoke again, gone tight with something between shock and grief and sudden, blazing anger. "Where's your father, child?" "Papa's dead, sir." The words came out slurred, tongue thick with cold. 6 months now. The man's face did something complicated. 20 emotions in 2 seconds, settling finally into a hard determination that looked like stone. He reached slowly for the watch, turned it over, read the engraving in the starlight. His hands were shaking, but not from temperature. "You're Coraline." She nodded. Wasn't a question that time either. He pulled a Navajo blanket from his saddle, the kind that weighed 8 pounds and could keep a man alive through a Montana blizzard. Wrapped it around her shoulders without touching more than he had to, giving her a dignity she hadn't felt in half a year. "I'm Samuel Blackwood. Your father and I were partners. Can you stand?" "Don't think so, sir." "Then I'm going to lift you. That all right?" Another nod. Her neck barely worked. He picked her up like she weighed nothing, like she was made of glass and good intentions. Settled her in front of the saddle, climbed up behind. His arms came around to hold the reins, blocking the worst of the wind that cut across the depot platform. "There's a ranch about 4 miles west. Warm house, hot food, my sister to look after you proper." He touched his heels to the horse's sides. The animal started forward, steady despite the snow that had begun falling thick enough to erase their tracks within minutes. "What were you doing out here alone?" "Uncle Vernon brought me, sir. Said he was sending me to St. Catherine's Orphanage in Helena. Said there was prepaid fare, but there wasn't." "No, there wasn't." Samuel Blackwood's voice had gone cold as the wind. Not angry cold, but the cold of a man making calculations. The cold of someone adding numbers that didn't balance and reaching conclusions that required action. "Your uncle left you here to freeze." Not a question that time either. They rode in silence, broken only by wind and hoofbeats and the creak of leather. Coraline felt warmth seeping through the blanket, through her bones, pulling her towards sleep that might have been death if she'd stayed on that bench 20 minutes longer. She fought the sleep, tried to stay present, tried to understand why Uncle Vernon had lied about so many things. About the prepaid ticket, about Samuel Blackwood being dead, about Papa owing money to everyone in Helena. "Uncle Vernon said you were dead, Mr. Blackwood." The words fell out of her half-frozen mouth like stones. "Said Papa owed you money. Said nobody survived." Samuel's chest went rigid behind her. The horse kept walking, but something in the man's breathing changed. "Vernon told you I was dead." "Yes, sir. Said Papa owed you for the mine. Said there wasn't anybody left who cared." "Your uncle lied to you, Coraline. I'm not dead. Your papa didn't owe me 1 red cent. We were partners, 50-50 on everything. When Joshua sold his half of the Silver Bell before he passed, I paid him $18,000 cash. No debt, no owing." The silence that followed held enough weight to crush mountains. Samuel understood now. Vernon had told Coraline that her one potential savior was dead, ensuring she'd have no hope, no alternative, no choice but the orphanage or the depot bench. And Vernon had known that no train would come, had known the depot master would close at 9:30, had known that a child left alone in 24 below would not survive until morning. 25 minutes later, the ranch house blazed with lamplight, windows glowing gold against the darkness like something from a fever dream. The building was larger than any home Coraline had seen. 2 stories of ponderosa pine with smoke rising from 3 chimneys. The door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back tight, face sharp with intelligence and immediate concern. Sam, what in God's name? This is Joshua Dalton's daughter. He dismounted, lifted Coraline down with the same glass careful gentleness. Found her at the depot, alone, in this cold. The woman's face changed. Sweet, merciful heaven. Bring her inside. Miguel, hot water and broth, now. The warmth hit like a wall when they crossed the threshold. Coraline's skin burned where the heat touched, the dangerous kind of burning that meant real damage trying to heal. The woman, Sam's sister, peeled off the frozen coat with efficient gentleness, wrapped quilts around her instead. I'm Beatrice Blackwood. You're safe now, sweetheart. Her hands checked out her Coraline's fingers and toes, testing for frostbite with the practiced touch of someone who'd done battlefield medicine. Can you feel this? Yes, ma'am. Good, that's very good. She kept working, rubbing circulation back into frozen limbs with a methodical patience that spoke of years doing exactly this kind of emergency care. A Mexican man appeared with a steaming mug, the smell of beef and onions rising in clouds that made Coraline's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Samuel took the mug, tested the temperature against his own lips, held it steady while Coraline sipped. The heat hurt going down, scalding her throat, but she didn't care. It was warm. It was food. It was the first thing anyone had given her without demanding payment in 6 months. Samuel handed something to Beatrice, a folded paper pulled from Coraline's coat pocket. She read it, her face going hard as winter stone. Sending ward to St. Catherine's Orphanage. Prepaid fare enclosed. Child has accumulated debts that must be settled. V. Dalton, legal guardian. She looked up at her brother. There's a stamp from the ticket office. No payment received. He left her there to die, Sam. On Christmas Eve. I know. Coraline swallowed more broth, watching them through exhausted eyes. The warmth was making her dizzy, pulling her down towards sleep that felt safe for the first time since Papa had died in the mine collapse. She tried to say something, tried to explain about Uncle Vernon being angry all the time lately, about him saying she was too expensive to keep, about the men who came to the house at night demanding money. Uncle Vernon said you were dead, Mr. Blackwood. The words came out whisper soft. Papa told me before the mine collapsed. He said if I was ever alone, if I ever needed help, I should find Samuel Blackwood at Blackwood Ranch. Samuel's hand found her shoulder, careful and warm. Your papa was right. And I'm going to make this legal, Coraline. I'm getting proper custody. Beatrice set the note down, jaw tight with controlled fury. This isn't guardianship, Sam. This is desertion. Attempted murder. Then we fix it legal. He looked at Coraline, and she saw something in his face that reminded her of Papa. That same steady determination that said when a promise was made, it would be kept no matter the cost. Your Papa named me in his will. Specified it clear. I'll go to Judge Pritchard first thing after Christmas. Get the paperwork filed right. Coraline's eyes were closing despite her best efforts. The warmth, the food, the first safety she'd felt in half a year. It pulled her down like gravity, like the weight of her own exhausted body finally admitting that it couldn't stay vigilant anymore. Just before darkness took her completely, she heard Beatrice say something that seemed important but felt far away. That watch. She wouldn't let go of it, not even when her hands went blue. Samuel's voice sounded distant now, coming from the other side of sleep. It was Joshua's. He always said it was for me. Partner in all things. Then closer, right beside her ear as he settled her into a bed that felt like clouds. Coraline, does your uncle know about your papa's trust fund? But she was already gone, the question floating unanswered in warm air that smelled like safety and second chances. Christmas morning came cold and clear, the kind of Montana dawn where the sky hurt to look at, blue enough to crack. Coraline had been at the ranch 12 hours, long enough to sleep without nightmares, long enough to wake in a room filled with winter sunlight instead of Vernon shouting. The bedroom was 12 by 14 feet, pine walls, Victorian wallpaper with a pattern of roses that had faded to the color of old photographs. An iron bed, Jenny Lind style, popular in the 1880s. A wash basin on an oak table. A window overlooking mountains she'd never seen from this angle. Peaks that looked close enough to touch and were actually 30 miles distant. She lay still for 5 minutes, afraid that moving would shatter whatever spell had brought her here, afraid that Uncle Vernon would burst through the door with his whiskey breath in his cruel hands and his endless reminders that she cost too much to keep. But the door opened gently, and it was Beatrice carrying the clothes that looked newer than anything Coraline had owned since Papa died. "Good morning, sweetheart. You slept 11 hours. Your body needed the rest." "Where am I?" "Blackwood Ranch. My brother Samuel saved you last night. Do you remember?" Coraline nodded, remembered the cold, remembered the horse, remembered strong arms that held her like she mattered. Is he really the Samuel that Papa knew? The one from the mine? The same. They were partners for 10 years, built this ranch together from nothing. On the clothes fit better than her own had in months. A navy wool dress, a knit sweater, new leather shoes that didn't pinch. Beatrice's hands were gentle as she helped with the buttons, gentle in a way that made Coraline's chest hurt with something she couldn't name. The dining room held a table made from black walnut, large enough to seat 12. Food covered its surface, eggs fried in butter, bacon thick as her thumb, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Milk in a glass pitcher, cream floating on top. Coraline sat carefully, hands folded in her lap, waiting for someone to tell her how much this meal would cost, how many hours of work it would take to pay back, how far in debt she'd fall for the crime of being hungry. Samuel sat across from her, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You don't have to ask permission to eat, Coraline. This is breakfast. Everyone eats." "Do I have to pay for it, sir?" He stopped chewing. Set his fork down with the kind of care people use when they're trying very hard not to show anger. "No, child, nobody pays for food in this house. Not guests, not family, not anybody. Uncle Vernon said I owed him for every seal, $340 total. He said I had to work it off or go to the orphanage." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush furniture. Beatrice broke it first. "Your uncle lied about many things, sweetheart. That was one of them." She glanced at Samuel, some unspoken communication passing between siblings who'd lived together for 55 years. He nodded once, reached into his vest pocket, pulled out an envelope. "Coraline, do you know what your father left for you?" She shook her head. Uncle Vernon had been very clear. Papa left debts, Papa left problems, Papa left nothing but burden. Your father was a smart man. He sold his half of the Silver Bell mine before he died. Put the money somewhere safe. Samuel pulled a letter from the envelope, unfolded it with careful hands. "This is from Montana Territorial Bank in Helena, dated June 18th, 1889, 3 days after your papa passed." He slid the letter across the table. Coraline looked at the words she couldn't read, the official seal at the top, the signature at the bottom. "What does it say, sir?" Samuel read aloud, his voice steady but his eyes hard with controlled fury. "Montana Territorial Bank, Helena. To whom it may concern. This letter confirms that the sum of $18,000 proceeds from the sale of the Silver Bell mining claim, has been deposited in trust for Miss Coraline May Dalton, daughter of Joshua Dalton, deceased. Said funds to be held until Miss Dalton reaches her 18th birthday, to be administered by her legal guardian as necessary for her care and education." The kitchen went silent except for the crackle of the wood stove. $18,000. The number was too large to understand. Larger than anything Coraline had ever imagined. Larger than the entire town of Helena. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Your papa sold his mining claim before he died. Set the money aside for you, for when you are grown." Samuel's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "But until you're 18, your legal guardian controls that money, can withdraw it for your care and education." Miguel Santos stepped into the room then, the ranch foreman, 42 years old with weathered brown skin and eyes that had seen enough of the world to recognize evil when it wore a family name. "Vernon's been waiting for the right moment to drain that trust fund dry, boss. The whole town knew about his gambling, about the debts to Silas Drummond, the loan shark who runs the back room at the Silver Dollar Saloon. $600 owed with interest compounding weekly." "He tried to steal from me?" Coraline's voice came out small, confused. "But I'm his family." "No, child." Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm, the kind of gentle that doesn't hide hard truths. "He tried to murder you. When you couldn't figure out how to steal quietly, He decided to let you freeze and collect the money anyway as your grieving uncle, the only family member left. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Coraline felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, which had already learned to expect cruelty, but some last small piece of hope that maybe Uncle Vernon had cared, just a little, just enough. Why, Mary? She looked at Samuel with eyes that had seen too much for 11 years. Why would he do that? Because $18,000 is more than most men see in a lifetime, Coraline. And some men, when they look at that kind of money, they stop seeing anything else. They stop seeing family. They stop seeing children. They just see numbers that could save them from their own mistakes. Samuel stood, walked to where she sat, knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. He didn't touch her, didn't invade her space, just looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen wars and winters, and now were seeing her like she was something that mattered. Coraline, I made a promise to your father. If anything happened to him, I'd look after his family. I couldn't save him from the mine collapse, but I can save you from Vernon. I'm going to fight for legal guardianship. It won't be easy. Vernon's blood kin and Montana law favors that, but we're going to treat. What if the judge says I have to go back? Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we find another way. But Coraline, I want you to understand something right now, right here at this table. You are not going back to that man, not while I'm breathing. She believed him, not because of the words, which were the kind of promises adults made and broke every day, but because of the way he said them, the way his voice didn't waver, the way his eyes held hers without looking away. Can I stay here until the judge decides? You're staying here regardless. This is your home now. But Uncle Vernon is my legal guardian. Doesn't he get to say? Not while you're under my roof. He can file paperwork. He can hire lawyers. He can make noise. But until a judge orders otherwise, you're staying right here where you're safe. Miguel cleared his throat from the doorway. Boss, you should know. Doc Garrett's coming by this afternoon. Beatrice asked him to do a full medical examination for the court records. Samuel nodded. Good. We document everything, every piece of evidence we can gather. The day passed in a strange dream. Dr. Garrett arrived at 2 o'clock, a 65-year-old man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Coraline with professional thoroughness in front of Beatrice, documenting everything with the careful precision of someone who knew these notes might be read in court. Frostbite damage, he said, touching the white patches on her toes. Months old. 3, maybe 4. These weren't treated properly when they occurred. Uncle Vernon said doctors cost too much. Dr. Garrett's jaw tightened. He wrote that down, too. When did you last have a full meal? Before yesterday, I mean. Coraline thought about it. There had been stew on Thanksgiving, but Uncle Vernon had eaten most of it, leaving her with broth and 2 small pieces of potato. Thanksgiving Day, sir, but not much. He measured her height, her weight, noted how her dress hung loose despite being properly sized. When he finished, he had 3 pages of documentation. He read parts aloud to Samuel and Beatrice, his voice clinical, but his eyes angry. Chronic malnutrition. Patient weighs 18 pounds below normal for her age and height. Old frostbite injuries, untreated. Bruising and various stages of healing on ribs and upper arms, consistent with rough handling. Dental indicators of vitamin deficiency. He folded the papers with hands that weren't quite steady. This is neglect, Samuel. Medical evidence of prolonged malnutrition and untreated injuries. In front of Judge Pritchard, this carries weight. Enough weight to overcome blood relation? I don't know, but it's a start. After the doctor left, Beatrice pulled out a primer, the kind used in frontier schools for children just learning letters. She set it on the kitchen table in front of Coraline. Can you read this, sweetheart? Coraline looked at the page. The letters swam together, meaningless as bird tracks in snow. Shame burned hot in her chest, the kind of shame that came from being 11 years old and knowing you should know things you didn't. No, ma'am. Beatrice's face softened with something that looked like carefully controlled rage. Not your fault, child, but we need to know where we stand. She pointed to the first word. Do you know any letters at all? Coraline shook her head. Uncle Vernon had been clear. Schooling was waste. Girls didn't need reading, just needed to know how to cook and clean and keep quiet. Keep quiet most of all. Samuel made a sound from across the room. When Coraline looked up, his face was tight with controlled fury. He kept you illiterate on purpose. Easier to control, easier to steal from. Beatrice touched Coraline's head. We have time before any court hearing. If you can read by then, even just a little, it proves that guardianship under Samuel is working. That you're thriving here in ways you never did with Vernon. I can learn? The hope in her own voice surprised Coraline. She'd forgotten what hope sounded like. You can learn. We'll start right now. Beatrice opened the primer to the first page. This is C. It's the letter your name begins with. Like this. She traced it with her finger. Coraline copied the motion, feeling the shape of it. The letter that started her name. The letter she'd never known before today. For Coraline. C for Christmas. C for the chance she'd been given by a man who kept promises even to dead friends. They worked for an hour. Coraline's tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. Beatrice's patience endless as winter. By the time the light began to fade, Coraline could write 4 letters. C-O-R-A, her name. The first 4 letters of her own name, written by her own hand. She stared at them like they were magic. Like they were proof of something larger than survival, larger than just being alive. Proof that she could become something more than what Vernon had tried to make her. Present day, 1951, the story paused. Samuel's breathing had grown more labored during the telling, each inhale a battle. Coraline wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, 72 years old but feeling 11 again. That was the first night, she said to Thomas, the night everything changed. Your grandfather made a promise at that kitchen table, and he spent the next 7 years keeping it, no matter what it cost him. But he won, Thomas said. You're here, you took his name. He won. He won the legal battle, yes, but Thomas, there are costs that don't show up in court records. Prices paid in ways that don't leave scars you can photograph. She looked at Samuel, dying slowly in the bed where he'd slept for 72 years. The ranch outside was worth a fortune now. 3,000 acres, 4,000 head of cattle, buildings and equipment and investments that added up to numbers that made 18,000 look small. But the real fortune was simpler. It was a girl who'd learned to read, a woman who'd become a teacher, a family built on choice instead of blood. Your grandfather taught me that some promises are worth dying for, Coraline said softly. And some men keep their promises long after everyone else would have walked away. Thomas moved closer to the bed. What happens now? Now? Coraline smiled through tears. Now I keep my promise to him. I stay until the end. I hold his hand like he held mine that night in 1889. And I make sure he knows he didn't fail. Not once, not ever. She squeezed Samuel's hand. His eyes opened, cloudy but still gray, still steel underneath. Still here, little one? His voice was barely more than breath. Always, Papa. I'm staying right here. Good. He smiled, and for just a moment, he looked like the man who'd ridden through a blizzard to save a freezing child. That's good. You keep that promise. You keep it for both of us. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and quiet, covering the ranch in white like a blanket. Like the blanket that had saved her life 62 years ago. Like the promise that had changed everything. The first promise, the one that mattered most. The one that said family wasn't blood, but choice. And love wasn't what you said, but what you did when it cost you everything to keep your word. 3 days after Christmas, Vernon Dalton rode out to Blackwood Ranch with documents that smelled like printer's ink and lawyer's promises. He didn't come alone. Marshal Keene rode beside him, a decent man caught in an ugly situation, his face apologetic before he had even spoken a word. Samuel was in the north pasture mending fence when Miguel came riding hard, his horse throwing mud from the thawing snow. The look on the foreman's face said everything Samuel needed to know. Vernon's at the house, got the marshal with him, got papers. Samuel didn't waste time with questions. He turned his horse toward home, Miguel falling in beside him, both men riding at a pace that said this wasn't a social call. They found Vernon on the porch, standing like he owned the place. He'd cleaned up since Christmas Eve. New coat, probably borrowed. Hair slicked back with pomade. The performance of respectability worn like a costume. Marshal Keene stood beside his horse, one hand on the reins, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Samuel, Vernon's voice carried false warmth, heard you picked up something that belongs to me. She's not a thing. She's a child, and she's staying here. That's not your decision to make. Vernon pulled papers from his coat, waved them like a flag. I'm her legal guardian, her father's brother. Blood kin, Marshal here will confirm. Territorial statute says blood relatives take precedence. Marshal Keene shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable as a cat in water. It's true, Mr. Blackwood. Unless there's proof of unfitness, the law favors family. He left her at the depot to freeze, on Christmas Eve in 24 below weather. That's proof enough. I did no such thing. Vernon's voice rose, indignant as a preacher accused of sin. I provided prepaid fare to a proper Christian orphanage. If the ticket master failed to honor it, that's not my failing. The child has needs I cannot meet, needs that require proper institutional care. You're a liar. Vernon's smile widened, showing teeth like a dog shows teeth. Not friendly. Predatory. Careful, Samuel. That's slander, and it won't change the law. He gestured to Marshal Keene. Show him the statute. The marshal pulled out a small book, read without enthusiasm. Montana Territorial Code, Section 47. In matters of guardianship, blood relations of the first degree shall take precedence over all other claims, unless said relation is proven morally unfit by a preponderance of evidence before a territorial judge. Then we'll go before a judge. Samuel stepped off the porch. Right now, today, we'll let Judge Pritchard decide. Oh, we will. Vernon folded his papers with the careful precision of a man who'd practiced this moment. But you should know, Miss Pritchard and I have an understanding. He's a reasonable man who respects the law, and the law says that girl is mine. Samuel moved closer to Vernon's horse, close enough to see the broken blood vessels in the man's nose, close enough to smell yesterday's whiskey still seeping through his pores. She stays here until the hearing. Non-negotiable. Vernon studied him for a long moment, then shrugged like it didn't matter, like he'd already won and the rest was just paperwork. Fine, keep her warm for me. But Samuel, Judge Pritchard owes me favors. You might have saved Joshua's daughter from the cold, but you won't save her from the law. He wheeled his horse around and left, Marshal Keene following with a backward glance that might have been apologetic. Miguel spat into the snow after they disappeared down the road. That man's got a black soul, boss. Doesn't matter. Samuel's voice was flat. What matters is the law, and we need to understand exactly what we're up against. Inside the house, Beatrice was unpacking Coraline's carpet bag, the small battered case Vernon had left at the depot. Most of it was empty, packed with the kind of carelessness that spoke volumes. A spare dress 2 sizes too small, a hairbrush with half the bristles missing, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth like it mattered, a sealed envelope. Beatrice turned it over, read the return address. Her face went pale as January frost. Sam, you need to see this. He took the envelope, broke the seal, pulled out the letter inside, started reading, stopped, read it again. Sweet Jesus. What is it? Miguel moved closer. Samuel's hand was shaking. He read aloud, his voice flat with shock. Samuel's hand was shaking. He read aloud, his voice flat with shock. The bank confirms $18,000 from the Silver Bell sale, held in trust until Coraline turns 18, under Vernon's guardianship. The kitchen went silent except for the crackle of the stove. $18,000. Beatrice said it like a prayer or a curse. Vernon knows about this. Miguel's voice was certain. Has to. That's why he kept her after Joshua died. That's why he didn't send her to an orphanage 6 months ago. Samuel looked at the letter again, seeing the date. June 18th, 1889. 3 days after Joshua died. The postmark showed it had been delivered to Vernon's address on June 20th. He's known for 6 months. Kept her in his house, feeding her scraps, letting her freeze, all while planning how to access this money. And when he couldn't figure out how to do it quietly, Beatrice's voice was tight with fury, he decided to abandon her. Let her freeze, collect the money anyway as her grieving uncle, the only family she had left. The back door opened. Doc Garrett came in without knocking, the way old friends do, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped when he saw their faces. What happened? Samuel handed him the letter. The doctor read it, his weathered face going grim. Vernon filed something this morning. Didn't know what it was about, but I saw him at the courthouse with his attorney, fellow named Vance from Helena. What kind of filing? Petition to liquidate the trust fund. Claims Coraline accumulated debts under his care. Medical expenses, schooling costs, room and board. Says the money needs to be accessed immediately to settle accounts. Samuel's fist hit the table hard enough to rattle the bread pans. He's got 6 weeks, maybe 8 before a judge reviews that petition. If he gets guardianship confirmed before then, he takes everything. Every cent Joshua saved for his daughter. Miguel finished the thought. Coraline appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the raised voices. She wore the dress Beatrice had given her, her hair brushed and braided. She looked healthier already after 3 days of regular meals and warm sleep, but her eyes held the wariness of a deer that's learned humans mean danger. Is Uncle Vernon coming to take me? Samuel knelt to her level, the way he always did when something mattered. He's trying, Coraline, but we're going to fight him. We're going to show the judge what kind of man he really is. What if the judge believes him instead of you? It was the question Samuel had been asking himself since Vernon rode away. The question that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling beams Joshua had helped him install 10 years ago. Then we appeal. We keep fighting. We don't give up. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Montana territorial law was clear. Blood relations had precedence. To overcome that, they'd need proof of unfitness so compelling that Judge Pritchard had no choice but to rule against statute, and Vernon Dalton had already hired Cornelius Vance, the man who never lost. Present day, 1951. Samuel's breathing had grown worse. Each inhale sounded like gravel in a tin can. Coraline held his hand tighter, feeling the pulse beneath papery skin. Still there. Still fighting. The petition, Thomas said. Vernon tried to steal your inheritance before the trial even started. $18,000 was more money than most families saw in 10 years, Coraline said. For a gambling man drowning in debt, it was salvation. And I was just an obstacle, a child who cost money to feed, who might grow old enough to ask questions, who might one day realize what he'd done. But Grandpa stopped him. Not yet, not in that moment. First, we had to survive what came next, the silent war, the kind that doesn't use guns but can kill you just as dead. She took a breath, remembering. The memory still sharp after 62 years. Your grandfather taught me something important in those weeks. He taught me that sometimes the hardest battles aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones where people smile to your face while sharpening knives behind their backs. January 1890. The first Sunday after New Year's, Samuel brought Coraline to church. First Presbyterian, Helena. White clapboard building with a bell tower that could be heard for 3 miles on quiet mornings. It was a mistake. Samuel knew it within 5 minutes of arriving. But backing down wasn't in his nature, and teaching Coraline to hide felt like admitting shame they didn't own. They walked up the church steps together, Samuel in his Sunday suit, dark wool that still smelled faintly of cedar, from the chest where it spent 50 weeks a year. Beatrice beside him in a dress that had been fashionable 15 years ago and didn't care. Coraline between them wearing the navy dress Beatrice had made over, holding Samuel's hand like it was an anchor. The whispers started before they reached the door. That's the Dalton girl, living out at Holloway's place. The name was wrong, but the venom was right. Just the 3 of them. Bachelor raising a child. It ain't natural. Inside, Reverend Patterson was already 10 minutes into his sermon. They slipped into a back pew. The Reverend's eyes found them, paused, then continued with his text. But something in his tone had shifted, sharpened. The family is the bedrock of Christian society. His voice carried through the packed room. Father, mother, children, bound by blood and blessed by God, we must honor the natural order. Respect the bonds that tie us to our kin. Beatrice's face went hard as flint. The sermon continued in that vein for 20 minutes. Blood ties, family loyalty, the sacred duty of caring for one's own relations. Every word felt aimed like an arrow at the back pew. When they finally stood for the closing hymn, Coraline could feel eyes on her back like physical weight, judgment made manifest in sidelong glances and pursed lips. The exodus afterward was worse. People clustered in tight groups, conversations stopping when Samuel approached. Merchants who'd always nodded to him now found reason to look elsewhere. Margaret Henderson positioned herself directly in their path. Banker's wife, queen of Helena society, smile sharp as winter wind. Mr. Blackwood, her voice dripped false concern. We haven't been properly introduced to your house guest. This is Coraline May Dalton, Joshua Dalton's daughter. Yes, we'd heard. Margaret's eye writes that I traveled over Coraline with the assessment used for livestock at auction. Poor dear, losing her father so young, then her uncle finding himself unable to care for her. Such a tragedy. Her uncle abandoned her at a depot to freeze. Samuel's voice was level. That's not tragedy. That's attempted murder. The women around Margaret made shocked sounds, the kind that weren't actually shocked at all. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Blackwood. Vernon Dalton is a respected member of this community, a man of business, family to this child, a man who gambles away money he doesn't have and tried to steal from an orphan's trust fund. Beatrice's voice could have cut glass. But do go on about respect, Margaret. Margaret's smile never wavered. I'm simply concerned for propriety, a young girl living with a bachelor. Even with your presence, Miss Blackwood, well, tongues will wag. Then let them wag somewhere else. Samuel moved a step around her, but Margaret wasn't finished. Judge Pritchard is a godly man, Mr. Blackwood. He values Christian morality and proper family structure. You might want to consider that before this situation becomes permanent. She swept away, her flock following. Coraline felt Samuel's hand tighten on her shoulder. Don't listen to them. But Coraline had heard the truth underneath the words. She'd lived 11 years learning to read the currents beneath what people said. What she'd heard was clear enough. The town was turning against them. 2 days later, Samuel went to the general store for fence wire and nails. Spring repairs wouldn't wait for legal battles. The bell above the door jangled. 4 men stood at the counter. 3 turned away. The fourth, Tom Brenner, who ran the feed mill, met Samuel's eyes for half a second, then found something fascinating about his boots. George Patterson, the store owner, kept polishing a jar that was already clean. Needs 60 feet of fence wire and 5 pounds of nails. Patterson didn't look up. Might be we're out. I can see the wire from here, George. Reserved for another customer. The air in the store got thick. Samuel kept his voice level. You've sold me supplies for 15 years, and I'll sell you more, just not today. Patterson finally met his eyes, and what Samuel saw there wasn't malice. It was fear, the kind that makes good men do cowardly things. I've got a business to run, Sam. Can't afford to take sides. This isn't about sides, it's about a child. It's about Vernon Dalton's family rights. This from Ed Hoskins at the counter. Man who owed Vernon money and everyone knew it. Man's got a claim to his own blood. You keeping that girl out at your place? No proper woman around except your sister. People talk. Let them. Judge Pritchard listens to what people say. Ed's voice carried the smugness of a man repeating someone else's argument. Respectable folks have concerns. A bachelor and a young girl under one roof. It ain't Christian. Samuel's fists clenched. Miguel had warned him about this, about keeping his temper, about not giving Vernon's attorney ammunition. But the unfairness of it burned like acid. That girl was left to freeze on a depot platform on Christmas Eve by the man you're defending. Where were your Christian concerns then? Vernon made arrangements. Vernon left her with $1.14 in a lie about prepaid fare. Samuel's voice went quiet, which made it more dangerous. And you want to hand her back to him because I'm not married. That's your measure of morality. Patterson cleared his throat. Sam, please, just come back next week, after the hearing, when things are settled. Samuel looked at each of them in turn, saw the way they wouldn't meet his eyes, saw the cowardice dressed up as propriety. He walked out without the wire. Miguel was waiting by the wagon, face grim. Heard it from out here. Town's made its choice. Half the town, the half that owes Vernon money or fears his attorney. Miguel climbed up to the driver's seat. Other half's with you, just quieter about it. They rode in silence for a mile. Then Miguel said what they'd both been thinking. Boss, there's something you should know. Folks are saying things about why a rich man would fight so hard for a girl who's not his blood. Saying maybe your interests aren't pure. Maybe you're after that trust fund yourself. Samuel didn't respond, couldn't trust his voice. I know it's horseshit, Miguel continued. Anyone who knows you knows it, but Vance will use it. Will paint you as a wealthy bachelor with questionable motives. Make it sound dirty when it's the cleanest thing I've ever seen a man do. That night, Samuel stood on the porch long after dark, staring at the mountains he couldn't see but knew were there, thinking about reputation and law and the gap between what was right and what was legal. Beatrice found him there near midnight. You're going to freeze. Wouldn't be the worst thing that I've survived. She stood beside him, silent for a long moment. They're turning the town against you. I know. Vance is good at this. Character assassination. Making good men look like predators. Making rescue look like opportunism. I know that too. Then why are we still fighting? Why not take Coraline and leave? Go to California where Vernon can't reach. Start over where nobody knows the history. Samuel was quiet for so long, Beatrice thought he might not answer. Then, because I made a promise to Joshua. Because that little girl deserves to see her uncle answer for what he did. And because running teaches her that when things get hard, you disappear. I won't teach her that. I won't. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. That's when promises matter most. Inside, Coraline sat at the kitchen table with a candle burning low and a piece of paper in front of her. Her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration as she formed the letters one slow stroke at a time. The girl found her way home. She'd read that sentence from the primer 2 weeks ago. Now she was writing it herself. The letters weren't perfect. The G leaned wrong and the Y dragged too long. But they were hers, words she'd made with her own hand. Beatrice came in from checking the stove, saw what Coraline had written, and her face did something complicated. Read it to me, sweetheart. Coraline read the words aloud, her voice steady. When she finished, Beatrice pulled her into a hug that smelled like bread dough and lavender soap. Your papa would be so proud. Do you think the judge will care? That I can read now? I think it proves something Vernon never wanted proven. Beatrice held her at arm's length. That you're smart and capable. That you deserve better than what he gave you. Samuel appeared in the doorway, Miguel behind him. Both men had the look of people who'd been talking serious business in the barn. Show Sam what you wrote. Coraline held up the paper, suddenly shy. Samuel took it, read it carefully, then looked at her with something that might have been wonder. 12 weeks ago, you couldn't write your own name. Beatrice taught me. No. His voice was firm. Beatrice showed you how. You did the learning. That's all you, Coraline. He set the paper down, then pulled a larger document from his coat. The trust fund letter from the mining company. Can you read this? Coraline took it, sounded out the harder words. Montana Territorial Bank. Helena, to whom it may concern. This letter confirms that the sum of $18,000, she stumbled on proceeds but got the rest, has been deposited in trust for Miss Coraline May Dalton. $18,000, Samuel repeated. You understand what that means now? She nodded. It's what Papa left me for when I'm grown. And if Vernon gets guardianship, he'll take it. She said it matter of fact, the way you'd state the sun rises or water's wet. That's why he wants me back, not because he cares. Miguel made a sound of approval. Smart girl. Samuel exchanged a look with Beatrice. At the hearing, Judge Pritchard might ask you questions. He might ask you to read something to prove your learning. Would you be willing to do that? Coraline's stomach twisted. The thought of standing in front of all those people, the church ladies who whispered, the merchants who looked away, Uncle Vernon with his empty smile made her want to hide under the table. But then she thought of the primer, of the way letters had stopped being meaningless scratches and started being words, of the power in being able to read her own name. I'll do it, if it helps. It helps. Samuel pulled another paper from his coat, this one covered in numbers and columns. This is the ranch ledger, spring cattle count. Can you tell me what this number means? Coraline looked at where he pointed, 2,847. And this one? $18. Multiply them. She did the arithmetic in her head. Miguel had been teaching her figuring along with the Spanish. $51,246. Exactly. Samuel's voice held quiet pride. That's the ranch's liquid equity. Proof that I'm financially stable enough to provide for you. Vernon's attorney is going to claim I'm not fit, that I'm just a bachelor with no experience raising children. These numbers say different. Beatrice had been working on something at the counter. She came back with a folder, opened it to show careful charts tracking Coraline's progress. Dates, lessons completed, reading level assessments, 12 weeks of documented improvement. This shows guardian fitness. Vernon kept you illiterate for 11 years. Samuel's had you for 12 weeks, and you're reading at third grade level. That contrast speaks louder than any argument we could make. Coraline touched the charts, seeing her own growth mapped out in Beatrice's neat handwriting. It was proof. Proof she wasn't stupid or slow or worthless, like Uncle Vernon had always said. Proof that given a chance, she could learn anything. What if it's not enough? The question came out smaller than she meant it to. The adults exchanged looks. Then we fight harder, Samuel said. But Coraline, you need to understand something. Judge Pritchard is bound by law. Montana territorial statute says blood kin takes precedence unless proven unfit. That's a high bar to clear. What makes someone unfit? Neglect, abuse, moral corruption, financial irresponsibility. Miguel ticked them off on his fingers. We've got evidence of all four, but Vernon's got Cornelius Vance. That man could argue water uphill. And he's got the town on his side, Beatrice added, her voice tight, or enough of it to matter. Those church ladies have been spreading poison, saying it's improper for you to be here, that Sam's motivations aren't pure. Coraline had heard the whispers. She wasn't stupid. She knew what people thought when they saw a bachelor rancher taking in a young girl. Never mind that Beatrice was there. Never mind that Samuel had never been anything but proper and kind. People saw what they wanted to see. So what do we do? Samuel knelt beside her chair, putting them eye to eye. We tell the truth. We show the evidence. We prove that you're thriving here in ways you never did with Vernon. And we trust that Judge Pritchard cares more about your welfare than what the gossips think. And if he doesn't, Samuel's face was grim, then I'll figure something else out. But Coraline, I want you to know something. Your papa was my partner, my friend. The day he died in that mine collapse, I made myself a promise. If anything happened to him, I'd look after his family. I failed to keep him alive. That wasn't your fault, Coraline interrupted. Maybe not, but I can keep this promise. His hands were steady on her shoulders. I won't let Vernon take you. I won't let him steal your future. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do. You're staying here. That's a vow. Coraline threw her arms around his neck, holding tight. He smelled like leather and horse and the tobacco he sometimes smoked in the evening. He smelled like safety. Thank you, she whispered. When she finally pulled back, Beatrice was wiping her eyes with her apron, and Miguel was looking studiously at the ceiling. All right, Samuel's voice was rough. Get some sleep. We've got work tomorrow. But as Coraline climbed the stairs to her room, she heard the adults talking low in the kitchen, heard the worry they'd kept hidden from her, heard Samuel say something that made her blood run cold. If this goes wrong, I don't know what we'll do. Vernon's got the law. He's got Vance. He's got the town turning against us. We're fighting with both hands tied. She pressed her hand against the pocket watch in her nightstand drawer. The one thing Uncle Vernon hadn't managed to take. The engraving was worn smooth, but she traced it so many times she knew every curve by heart. For Samuel Blackwood, partner in all things. Papa had trusted him, had known somehow that if anything happened, Samuel would do the right thing. That would have to be enough. Present day 1951. Those weeks were the hardest, Coraline said. Watching your grandfather fight a battle he couldn't win with fists or money. Watching him hold his temper while people said terrible things. Watching him smile at me every morning like everything would be fine. Then standing on that porch every night, wondering if he'd made a promise he couldn't keep. Samuel's eyes had closed again, his breathing shallow, but his hand squeezed hers once. Still there, still listening. He never showed me how scared he was, she continued. never let me see the doubt. That's the kind of man he was. Strong enough to be gentle, brave enough to be patient, wealthy enough to know that some things can't be bought. Thomas moved closer. But something changed. Something turned the tide. Yes, Corlin smiled through tears. Something we didn't know existed. Something hidden in plain sight for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to change everything. She looked at the pocket watch on the bedside table. The same one, 62 years later. Your grandfather always said that Joshua Dalton was the smartest man he'd ever known. And in the end, that's what saved us all. Not money, not lawyers, but a smart man's final insurance policy, hidden where only the desperate would think to look. The fifth week of waiting brought a thaw. Not just in the weather, though the January ice had begun surrendering to February mud, but in the careful distance Corlin had maintained between herself and hope. She was learning to believe that safety might be permanent, that warmth might last, that the man who'd saved her life might actually win the fight to keep her. She was learning, but she hadn't learned yet. Not completely. That's why when Beatrice called her into the parlor on a gray afternoon with the kind of voice that meant something important, Coraline's first thought was that Vernon had won, that the judge had decided, that she'd have to pack the small bag again and return to the house that smelled like whiskey and cruelty. But Beatrice held the pocket watch. Not just held it, studied it with the intensity of a jeweler examining a stone for flaws. Sweetheart, how long have you had this watch? Papa gave it to me the week before he died, made me promise to keep it safe, said it was important. Did he say why? Corlin shook her head. Just said if anything happened to him, I should hold on to it, that it was for Mr. Blackwood, but he wanted me to keep it until the time was right. Beatrice turned the watch over in her hands. The gold caught lamplight, throwing small reflections across the parlor walls. She pressed the stem to open the main case. The watch face showed 3:20 in the afternoon, still keeping perfect time after 7 years. I've been cleaning this, Beatrice said, getting the tarnish off the engraving. And I noticed something. The back plate sits funny, like there's a second catch underneath. She pressed the main latch, then a spot near the hinge that didn't look like anything special. The back plate opened normally, but then a second compartment unfolded from inside, so thin that nobody would have known it existed unless they were looking for it. Inside was a piece of paper folded small and sealed with red wax. Joshua's seal, the initials J.D. pressed into wax that had gone dark with age. Coraline's heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? I don't know yet, but we need Samuel. They found him in the barn office, working through spring supply orders with Miguel. Both men looked up when Beatrice entered, carrying the watch like it was made of spun glass and prayers. Sam, Joshua left something hidden in the watch. The color drained from Samuel's face. He stood slowly, crossed the office in 3 strides, took the watch from his sister's hands, looked at the hidden compartment, at the sealed paper inside. His hands shook as he broke the seal. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. Joshua's handwriting, cramped and urgent, dated January 10th, 1889. 1 week before the mine collapse that killed him. Samuel read it once, twice. On the third reading, his vision blurred. Sweet Jesus. He knew. Joshua knew. Knew what? Miguel moved closer. Samuel's voice came out rough, like gravel over steel. Read it, Sam. Beatrice touched his arm. Out loud. We all need to hear. He cleared his throat, started again. To whom it may concern, should I die before my daughter Coraline reaches adulthood, I hereby state my wishes regarding her guardianship. Samuel Blackwood of Blackwood Ranch is the man I trust with her life and her future. Not my brother Vernon, never Vernon. The office went silent except for wind against the barn walls. Samuel continued, his voice steadier now. Vernon Dalton has demonstrated moral weakness, financial irresponsibility, and a character unsuited to raising a child. He gambles, he drinks, and he views family as assets to be exploited rather than people to be cherished. Samuel Blackwood was my partner in all things. He is honest, steady, and capable of providing the stable home my daughter deserves. I trust him as I have trusted no other man. He paused. The next part was harder. If questions arise about guardianship, Amos will understand. He knows what kind of man I was. He knows I carried him 3 miles at Shiloh with a mini A ball in my spine. He knows what a promise means. Signed, Joshua Dalton, January 10th, 1889. Miguel was the first to break the silence. Amos, Judge Amos Pritchard. They served together. Samuel's hand traced the signature, remembering his friend's hand forming those letters. In the war, Joshua never talked about it much, but I knew they'd been at Shiloh. That was bad fighting. This changes everything. Miguel leaned over to read. It's not just your word against Vernon's now, it's Joshua's stated wishes, in writing, with the judge's name attached. But will it hold up in court? Beatrice's lawyer mind was already working. It's not witnessed. It's hidden in a watch. Vance could argue it's not legally binding. Doesn't have to be legally binding. Samuel carefully refolded the letter. It just has to be true. And it is. Every word. He turned the paper over looking for more. Found a single line on the back in different ink like it had been added later. Amos knows I carried him 3 miles at Shiloh with a mini ball in my spine. He knows what a promise means. Joshua saved the judge's life. Corlin's voice was small but certain. In the war. More than saved it. Samuel's jaw set hard. He carried a wounded man 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet lodged next to his own spine. That's not just saving someone. That's dying for them and choosing not to. A man doesn't forget that kind of debt, Miguel said. And a man like Pritchard honors it. Samuel looked at Beatrice. When's the hearing? 3 weeks, March 15th, 10 in the morning. Then we have 3 weeks to prepare, to build a case so strong that even Vernon's lies can't stand against it. He touched the letter like it was sacred. Joshua planned for this. He knew Vernon might contest guardianship. He hid this insurance policy where only someone desperate would think to look. Corlin had been quiet, listening. Now she spoke. Papa told me to keep the watch safe, to give it to you when the time was right. I think this is what he meant. Samuel knelt to her level, put the watch in her hands, closing her small fingers around the gold case. Your papa was the smartest man I ever knew. And this proves it. He protected you even after death. Made sure that if Vernon tried what Joshua feared he would, there'd be evidence. There'd be truth. Will it be enough? The question hung in the cold barn air. I don't know, Samuel said, because lying to her had never been an option. But it's more than we had yesterday, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. One more piece of truth to stand on when everything else feels like quicksand. That night, Vernon Dalton came to the ranch alone. No marshal this time, no attorney, just a man with whiskey on his breath and desperation in his eyes, riding a borrowed horse through mud that sucked at hooves like the ground itself was trying to hold him back. Samuel was splitting wood for the kitchen stove when Vernon appeared at the tree line. Miguel saw him first, moved to intercept, but Samuel waved him off. Let him come. Let's hear what a desperate man sounds like when his lies start catching up. Vernon dismounted carefully, like a man who knew his balance wasn't what it should be. The clean coat from his last visit was gone. This was Vernon as he really was. Threadbare jacket, 3 days without shaving. The look of a man who'd been sleeping in his clothes and calling it good enough. Samuel, his voice tried for friendly and landed somewhere near pleading. We need to talk, man to man. We've got nothing to discuss. We do. Vernon came closer, hands out like he was approaching a spooked horse. I want to make you an offer, a way for everyone to walk away happy. Samuel didn't stop splitting wood. The axe came down with the steady rhythm of a man who'd been doing this for 40 years. Split, stack, split, stack. I'm listening. I'll withdraw my guardianship petition, sign over all parental rights. You can keep Coraline, raise her legal and proper, nobody to say different. Split, stack. In exchange for what? $2,000. Vernon pulled a folded paper from his coat. Cash money. I sign the papers, you give me the funds, and I'm gone. Out of Montana territory. You'll never hear from me again. Samuel set the axe down, looked at Vernon like he was examining something stuck to his boot. You're selling your niece. I'm being practical. Vernon's voice rose, defensive. She's better off with you, I can see that. But I've got debts, Sam. Serious debts. Silas Drummond's not a patient man, and I owe him $600 with interest running. He's threatening things I can't afford to have happen. Should have thought of that before you gambled. I know. Vernon's hands shook as he held out the paper. I know I'm worthless. I know I failed Joshua's daughter. But this way, everybody wins. Coraline gets a good home. You get legal custody. And I get to keep breathing. That's fair, isn't it? Samuel studied the man, saw the broken blood vessels, the shaking hands, the fear beneath the desperation, saw a coward who tried to kill a child for money, now trying to sell that same child for survival. No, Vernon blinked. What? I said no. Get off my land. But you'd win. Legal guardianship, no court battle, all settled clean. Listen to me very carefully, Vernon. That little girl up there in the house, watching us through the window, she deserves better than being bought and sold like cattle. She deserves justice. She deserves a court to hear what you did. And she deserves to see you answer for it. Vernon's face twisted. You self-righteous bastard. You think the judge will side with you? Vance has been working that courtroom for weeks. He's got half the town convinced you're unfit. A bachelor with questionable motives keeping a young girl isolated. Then let the judge decide. The judge will follow the law. Vernon's voice turned ugly. And the law says blood kin. You're nobody to that girl. Just her dead father's friend playing hero. Samuel moved then, fast enough that Vernon stumbled backward. Miguel was there instantly, hand on Samuel's arm, holding him back. Easy, boss. That's what he wants. Samuel realized Miguel was right. Vernon stood there with that sick smile coming back. And behind him at the bunkhouse window, Samuel saw movement. Someone watching. Someone ready to testify that Samuel Blackwood had assaulted Vernon Dalton the day before the hearing. Get off my land. Samuel said each word separately, clearly. Now. Vernon backed toward his horse, the smile widening. $2,000, Sam. Offer stands until morning. After that, he swung into the saddle with practiced ease of a man who'd spent more time on horses than sober. After that, you'll wish you'd taken it. Vance will tear you apart in that courtroom, make you look like a predator, make that little girl look like a fool. And when it's done, I'll have guardianship and that trust fund, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. He rode off, swaying slightly. Miguel spat into the mud after he disappeared. That was a setup. Someone was watching from the bunkhouse. I know. If you'd hit him, they'd have testimony, use it against you at trial. I know that too. They stood in silence, watching the spot where Vernon had vanished into the tree line. Boss, you could pay it. 2,000 is nothing to you, would solve everything clean. Would teach Coraline that some things can be bought. That money solves everything. That men like Vernon get to walk away from their sins if the price is right. Samuel picked up the axe again. I won't teach her that. Some things can't be bought. Justice is one of them. Inside, Coraline had watched the whole exchange from her window, had seen Uncle Vernon arrive, had seen Samuel refuse whatever offer was made, had seen Vernon ride away angry. Beatrice found her there, hands pressed against the cold glass. What happened? Uncle Vernon tried to give me to Mr. Blackwood, like I was something to trade. You heard? The window was open a crack. I heard enough. Beatrice pulled her away from the window, sat her on the bed, the same bed where she'd slept that first night, more asleep than alive, frost still melting from her hair. Your uncle is desperate, sweetheart. Desperate men do terrible things. Mr. Blackwood said no. He could have said yes, could have paid Uncle Vernon and made everything simple. But he said no. Do you know why? Coraline thought about it. Thought about the way Samuel had stood in the mud, axe in hand, facing down a man who wanted to turn her into a transaction. Because I'm not for sale. That's right. You're not for sale. You're not property. You're a child who deserves justice, not convenience. Beatrice touched her cheek. Your grandfather, I mean your real grandfather through marriage, that we haven't done yet but will, he's fighting for something bigger than just keeping you safe. He's fighting to show you that some things matter more than money, that some promises can't be broken just because it would be easier. What if the judge doesn't see it that way? Then Samuel will appeal. And if that doesn't work, he'll find another way. But Coraline, you need to understand, he's not fighting this battle because it's easy. He's fighting it because it's right. And that's the kind of man he is. 3 weeks collapsed into days, collapsed into hours. The hearing was set for March 15th at 10 in the morning. Montana Territorial Courthouse, Helena. Judge Amos Pritchard presiding. The night before, Coraline couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a candle and the primer, practicing words she already knew. Cat, dog, home, safe, reading them over and over like incantations. Like if she read them enough times, they'd become true in ways that couldn't be undone. Samuel found her there at 3 in the morning, her head drooping over the book, fighting sleep with the desperation of someone who knew nightmares were waiting. Can't rest? She shook her head. He poured himself coffee from the pot that always sat on the stove, thick and bitter and strong enough to wake the dead. Sat across from her at the table that had become their classroom, their conference room, their war room. Want to know something your papa told me once? She nodded. We were up in the Silver Bell mine, working a seam that looked promising but kept playing tricks on us. The rock would show color, then nothing. Show color, then nothing. Drove us half crazy trying to figure out which samples to trust. And Joshua said to me, Sam, sometimes you can't know. Sometimes you just have to sink the shaft and see what's down there. Standing on the surface guessing won't change what's below ground. What does that mean? It means tomorrow we're going to stand in front of Judge Pritchard and tell the truth. All of it. The good, the bad, the complicated. And then we're going to trust that the truth is enough. That when you strip away all the lies and lawyer tricks and town gossip, what's left is worth standing on. What if it's not enough? Samuel reached across the table, took her hand. His palm was calloused from 40 years of ranch work, warm and solid and real. Then we'll figure out what comes next. But Coraline, I want you to know something, and I want you to remember it no matter what happens tomorrow. I didn't take you in because of Buddy. I didn't keep you because of your papa's memory. I kept you because from that first night when I pulled you off that frozen bench, I knew you were supposed to be here. With me, with Beatrice, with Miguel in this ranch, in this life. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. And I choose you. Tears ran down her face, hot against skin that had been so cold 62 years ago, hot against fear that had been frozen into her bones by 6 months of Vernon's house. I choose you too, she whispered. They sat in silence then, coffee and candlelight and the sound of wind against windows. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight they had this, the quiet before battle, the moment when promises were made and held and believed in, despite all evidence that the world was cruel and judges followed law instead of justice. Present day, 1951. That was the last peaceful moment we had, Corlin said. The last time before everything changed, before we walked into that courtroom and discovered that sometimes truth isn't enough, that sometimes you need miracle. Samuel's breathing had grown worse. Each inhale sounded like tearing paper. But his eyes opened, focused on her face with the intensity of a man who knew his time was measured in hours now, not days. Tell him, Samuel whispered. Tell Thomas about the courtroom, about Pritchard, about what Vance did. Are you sure it's not a happy part of the story? It's true, that's what matters. Corlin nodded, wiped her eyes, turned back to her grandson. The courthouse was packed, 200 people in a room built for 120. Standing room only. People had come from 3 counties to watch, some because they cared about the outcome, most because it was theater, entertainment, the wealthy bachelor versus the struggling uncle with a child's future as the prize. She took a breath, and the years fell away again. March 15th, 1890. The Montana Territorial Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By 9:30, every bench was full. By 9:45, people lined the walls 3 deep. By 10 o'clock, when Judge Pritchard's gavel came down, there were men standing on the courthouse steps trying to hear through the open windows. Corlin sat between Samuel and Beatrice, wearing her navy dress, her hair braided so tight it pulled. Her hands shook in her lap until Samuel covered them with one of his, warm and steady and there. Vernon sat at the plaintiff's table with Cornelius Vance. Vernon looked respectable. Clean suit, hair pomaded back, expression appropriately somber. The picture of a concerned uncle. Vance sat beside him like a coiled snake, thin and sharp and patient. Judge Amos Pritchard entered from his chambers. 62 years old, Gray hair cut military short, face carved from granite, eyes that had seen too much death at Shiloh to be impressed by legal theater. All rise. The courtroom stood as one organism. Territorial Court is now in session. Case number 47, Dalton versus Blackwood. Petition for guardianship and trust fund administration. He settled into his chair, looked over spectacles at both tables. Mr. Vance, you filed this petition. Present your case. Vance stood, smooth as oil, voice like honey over steel. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of territorial law. Vernon Dalton is the blood uncle of Coraline Dalton, orphaned by her father's death 6 months ago. Under statute, blood relations of the first degree take precedence in guardianship matters. Mr. Blackwood, while well-intentioned, has no legal standing. Blackwood was named in Joshua Dalton's will, Pritchard said, a will that was never properly probated, Your Honor, and which contains guardianship language that conflicts with territorial statute. The law is clear. Blood kin takes priority unless proven morally unfit. Vance called his witnesses. First, a banker who testified Vernon had steady employment as a clerk, a minister who stated Vernon attended church regularly, 2 merchants who claimed Vernon was a man of good character, if occasionally challenged by financial circumstances. Then Vernon himself. He took the stand with hat in hands, playing the part of the grieving, overwhelmed uncle. Testified about taking Coraline in after Joshua's death, about struggling to provide for her despite limited means, about making the difficult decision to seek institutional care when he realized he couldn't give her the life she deserved. The depot incident. Vance's voice was gentle, leading. Tell the court what happened. I arranged passage to St. Catherine's Orphanage. Vernon's voice was steady, practiced. A fine institution run by good Christian women. I prepaid the fare, $3.50. Left Coraline at the depot with the ticket and clear instructions. Did you abandon her? Absolutely not. I ensured she had everything she needed. If the ticket master failed to honor the prepaid arrangement, that's his failing, not mine. It was a lie so smooth it almost sounded true. In Mr. Blackwood's current guardianship, do you have concerns? I do. Vernon's face arranged itself into worry. Samuel Blackwood is a bachelor, lives alone except for his sister, a young girl under his roof. It's not proper. People talk. And while I'm sure his intentions are good, there are questions about his fitness to raise a female child. The courtroom murmured. Pritchard's gavels came down. Order. Samuel's jaw clenched. Beatrice's hand found Coraline's other one, squeezed once, hard. Your witness, Mr. Blackwood. Samuel stood. He'd never done this before. Never cross-examined anyone. Never stood in a courtroom and tried to find truth in a tangle of lies. But he'd practiced with Beatrice, had spent nights learning how to ask questions that couldn't be dodged. Mr. Dalton, you testified you paid $3.50 for Coraline's train fare. That's correct. The ticket master's records show no such payment. We have his sworn affidavit. Samuel held up the paper. No transaction on Christmas Eve, no payment received. Vernon didn't flinch. Then he pocketed the money. That's theft, not abandonment on my part. And you left her with $1.14 in 24 below weather. On Christmas Eve, how long did you expect her to survive if no train came? Objection, relevance. Vance was on his feet. Goes to intent, Your Honor. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Dalton. Vernon's jaw tightened. I expected the arrangements I made to be honored. You gamble, Mr. Dalton. Objection, relevance. It goes to character, Your Honor, and to motive. Pritchard nodded. I'll allow it. Answer the question. I occasionally play cards for small stakes. Small stakes. Samuel pulled out the gambling markers Miguel had collected. These show $600 owed to Silas Drummond. That's not small stakes. Those are private debts. These debts came due in December, right before you left Coraline at the depot. Samuel laid out the timeline. And you filed a petition to liquidate her trust fund, $18,000 left by her father. You needed money. She had money. Convenient. That's a slanderous accusation. It's documented fact. Samuel handed the papers to the judge. The petition itself, filed January 2nd, requesting immediate access to trust funds for accumulated expenses. Pritchard read it, his face darkening. Vance tried to recover. My client was attempting to secure proper care. Your client was attempting theft. Samuel turned back to Vernon. You kept Coraline illiterate, didn't you? 11 years old and couldn't read her own name when she came to me. She's slow. She's reading at third grade level now, after 12 weeks. Dr. Garris's reports show she was deliberately malnourished and neglected under your care. Samuel laid the medical affidavit on the judge's bench. And Miguel Santos has testimony from the Silver Dollar Saloon that you attempted to borrow against the trust fund using Coraline as collateral for your gambling debts. The courtroom erupted. Pritchard's gavel came down hard. Order! I will have order! When quiet returned, Vance was on his feet. Your Honor, this is character assassination. My client's financial struggles don't negate his blood relationship or his legal rights under territorial statute. They speak to moral fitness, Pritchard said coldly, which is the statutory exception. Continue, Mr. Blackwood. Samuel called his witnesses. Dr. Garrett testified about the neglect, the malnutrition, the untreated frostbite scars. Beatrice presented her literacy charts, the dramatic improvement in 12 weeks. Miguel showed the gambling records and the attempted fraud. Then Samuel pulled out Joshua's letter. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. The entire courtroom leaned forward. This was hidden in Joshua Dalton's pocket watch, written 1 week before he died. It names his wishes for his daughter's guardianship. Vance objected immediately. Your Honor, this document is unwitnessed, not notarized. It has no legal standing. I'll decide what has standing. Pritchard's voice carried warning. Let me see it. Samuel handed over the letter, watched the judge's face as he read. Watch something pass over it like a shadow of old memory, old pain, old debt finally coming due. Pritchard looked up. Mr. Blackwood, would you ask young Coraline to approach the bench? Coraline stood on shaking legs, walked forward alone, small and brave in her navy dress. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. Can you read, Miss Dalton? Yes, sir. Read this for me. He handed her the trust fund document. Coraline took it, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling in her hands. Montana Territorial Bank, Helena. This letter confirms that the sum of $18,000 has been deposited in trust for Miss Coraline May Dalton to be held until her 18th birthday. Perfect. Pritchard's face softened. Not a single stumble. Who taught you to read? Miss Beatrice Holloway, sir. Mr. Sam helped with the numbers. And do you understand what this document means? Yes, sir, it's the money Papa left me for when I'm grown. Do you want to go back to your Uncle Vernon? The question hung in the air like smoke. Coraline looked at Vernon, then back at the judge. Her voice didn't waver. No, sir. I want to stay with Mr. Sam. He's kept his promise to Papa. He's kept me safe. Pritchard nodded slowly. Return to your seat. He waited until Coraline was back beside Samuel. Then he picked up his gavel. I've heard enough. Guardianship of Coraline May Dalton is awarded to Samuel Blackwood with all legal rights and responsibilities pertaining thereto. The gavel came down. The trust fund shall remain intact, locked in territorial bank custody under Mr. Blackwood's stewardship until Miss Dalton reaches her 18th birthday. Furthermore, Vernon Dalton is ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $1,200 for attempted fraud and is hereby enjoined from any contact with the minor child. This guardianship is permanent and final. Vernon surged to his feet. This isn't legal. You can't. I can, and I have. Marshal, escort Mr. Dalton from my courtroom. The courtroom exploded. Samuel pulled Coraline into his arms as she burst into tears, relief and joy, and the release of months of fear all pouring out at once. Beatrice was crying too. Miguel was pounding Samuel's back hard enough to leave bruises. Judge Pritchard watched them, his stern face cracking into something almost like a smile. Then he caught Samuel's eye and nodded once, a debt 27 years old, finally paid. Outside the courthouse, Vernon waited, no longer playing respectable, just angry now, raw and mean. You won, he said. Hope you're satisfied. I'm not satisfied. Coraline's safe. That's all that matters. Safe with a millionaire bachelor? People will still talk. Let them. I have legal papers and a clear conscience. What do you acquire, Vernon? Vernon was silent for a long moment. Then something in his face shifted. Not softness, actually, but maybe recognition. You know what's funny? Joshua used to tell me you were the best man he knew. I thought he was exaggerating, but turns out he was right. He turned toward his horse. Take care of that girl better than I did. Shouldn't be hard. He didn't look back. Not once. And Samuel wondered in the years after whether Vernon had ever understood what he'd thrown away. Whether in that Santa Fe boarding house, dying alone with pneumonia taking his lungs piece by piece, he'd thought of the niece he'd tried to kill. Whether regret had found him in the end. Samuel hoped it had, not for Vernon's sake, but because a man should know what his choices cost, even if that knowledge comes too late to matter. Then he rode away. Last time they ever saw him, Corlin tugged on Samuel's coat. Do you think he meant it? That he's sorry? I think he's sorry things didn't go his way. That's not the same as real regret. Why didn't he love me like Papa did? Samuel knelt down eye to eye. Some people don't know how to love, Corlin. That's not your fault. Never was. Never will be. Mr. Blackwood, can I call you something else? Like what? She whispered it, scared of the word but needing to say it. Boss Samuel Blackwood, who'd survived wars and winters and 40 years of Montana trying to kill him, who'd never cried in front of anyone since he was 12 years old, broke down and wept. Nothing would make me happier, little one. Spring 1951, Samuel died 3 hours after Coraline finished the story. Died with her hand in his, Thomas standing beside the bed, and the pocket watch on the nightstand keeping perfect time after 62 years. His last words were quiet. Kept my promise, Joshua. Kept it all the way through. The funeral brought 400 people, half of Montana it seemed. Ranchers and teachers and students Coraline had taught over 40 years. People who'd known Samuel as fair, honest, and harder than coffin nails when it came to keeping his word. They buried him beside Beatrice on the hill overlooking the ranch. The same hill where he and Joshua had stood in 1879 and decided this was where they'd build something lasting. 2 weeks later, Thomas found Coraline in the ranch office, going through papers. What are you doing? Settling the estate. Your grandfather left very specific instructions. Everything goes to you, doesn't it? Most of it, but there's a trust. For you, and for your children when you have them, and for their children after that. She showed him the papers. Your grandfather believed in planning ahead, in making sure promises lasted beyond one lifetime. What will you do now? Keep teaching, keep the school running, keep the ranch going with good management. She smiled. Keep the promise I made to him. To live well, to love hard, to show people that family isn't just blood. Thomas picked up the pocket watch from the desk. Can I see it? She nodded. He opened it, read the engraving that had started everything 62 years ago. For Samuel Blackwood, partner in all things. He earned this, Thomas said. He earned more than that. He earned something you can't engrave on gold. He earned the right to die knowing he kept every promise that mattered. That's worth more than all the ranches in Montana. Outside, spring had come full and complete. The snow was gone. The grass was green. New calves followed their mothers through pastures Joshua and Samuel had fenced together a lifetime ago. And on the hill where two graves stood side by side, wildflowers grew thick as hope. Yellow and purple and white, covering the ground where two men had promised each other partnership in all things and had meant it down to their bones. Some promises are worth dying for. Some men keep their promises long after everyone else would have walked away. And some girls grow up to be women who teach other children that family isn't blood, but choice. And love isn't what you say, but what you do when keeping your word costs everything you have. 10 years later, in 1961, an old woman of 82 stood at a podium in Helena, Montana. The town had grown, changed. But the courthouse was the same building where a judge had once ruled that promises mattered more than blood. They were dedicating a new elementary school, naming it after Samuel Blackwood, who'd funded education for ranch children for 40 years, who'd believed that teaching a child to read was worth more than any amount of cattle. Coraline Blackwood, teacher emeritus, spoke to the crowd. My father, and he was my father in every way that mattered, once told me that some winters are meant to end, that some endings are just better beginnings wearing old snow as a disguise. She looked at the building, at the children who would learn here, at the future stretching forward in ways Samuel would never see but had helped build anyway. 62 years ago, I was freezing to death on a depot platform. One man refused to let that be my ending. He turned it into a beginning, not just for me, but for everyone who's learned that you build family through loyalty, not inheritance. The crowd applauded. Thomas stood in the front row with his own children now. 3 generations of a family built on choice instead of blood, on promises kept instead of obligations honored. After the ceremony, Thomas walked his grandmother to her car. "You think Grandpa would be proud?" "I think he'd say we're making too much fuss, that he just did what needed doing." She smiled. "But yes, I think he'd be proud, not of the buildings or the money, but of this, of you, of knowing that what he started didn't end when he died." She drove home to the ranch, the same ranch, 72 years after a man had ridden through a blizzard to save a freezing child. In her bedroom, she kept the pocket watch on the nightstand. Every night before sleep, she wound it, kept it running, kept Joshua's promise to Samuel alive through the motion of gears and springs and time that wouldn't stop just because the people who mattered were gone. For Samuel Blackwood, partner in all things. The engraving was worn almost smooth now, but she could still feel it, could still remember the night when those words had meant everything, when they'd been the difference between death and life, between cruelty and kindness, between what was legal and what was right. She wound the watch one more time. "Still keeping promises, Pa," she whispered to the empty room. "Just like you taught me." And somewhere in whatever place exists beyond this one, maybe a man heard. Maybe he smiled. Maybe he knew that the best legacy isn't money or land or buildings with your name on them. It's the people who learn from your example that some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost. That family is choice. That love is action. That winter always ends if someone brave enough refuses to let you freeze. The watch ticked on. Perfect time, perfect rhythm, the sound of promises kept and kept and kept again, generation after generation, forever.